The drums of mourning echoed through the village of Ukuta, their slow rhythmic beats carrying the weight of another soul departing into the realm of the ancestors. Women, wrapped in flowing indigo cloth, wailed into the evening air, their voices rising and falling like waves against the shores of sorrow. Men stood in solemn silence, heads bowed, gripping their staffs as they awaited the burial rites. A fire crackled in the village square, illuminating the faces of the gathered mourners. The elder circle, a council of aged men with beards like wisps of white clouds, sat on carved wooden stools, their eyes dark with the wisdom of many seasons. Near them, the village priest Baba Ogunde sprinkled sacred herbs onto the flames, sending spirals of scented smoke toward the heavens. But amid the grief and reverence, a sound shattered the air: laughter. Not the nervous chuckle of a child, nor the soft sigh of remembrance. It was a full, hearty laugh, bold and unashamed, as if someone had heard a great joke at a time when silence was demanded. The villagers turned, eyes burning with disbelief and fury. There, standing near the back of the gathering, was Adiro, a young man of 17, his arms crossed, his dark eyes gleaming with amusement. His face, sharp and mischievous, carried none of the sadness that filled the square. Instead, his lips curled into a smirk. "Adiro," gasped his childhood friend Tunde, grabbing his arm. "Are you mad? This is a funeral." Adiro shrugged. "I know." The murmurs spread like wildfire through the crowd. A woman gasped and clutched her chest. An elder shook his head in disappointment. "How dare you laugh," barked Baba Ogunde, his deep voice sending tremors through the gathering. "Do you mock the dead?" Adiro tilted his head. "No, Baba. I do not mock the dead." He stepped forward, meeting the priest's fierce gaze with a calm confidence. "But tell me, is it not strange that we cry for them when they no longer suffer? Are they not free of pain, of hunger, of this endless toil?" The priest's staff struck the ground. "That is not for you to say, boy. We grieve because it is the way of things." Adiro exhaled, shaking his head. "The way of things," he repeated. "And who decided this way?" A gust of wind howled through the village, rustling the flames of the funeral pyre. The silence that followed was heavier than the weight of sorrow itself. And then an elder, Malu the storyteller, spoke. His voice, cracked with age but firm with wisdom, carried through the night. "You are the boy who laughs at funerals," he said. His faded eyes studied Adiro with something between curiosity and fear. "It has been foretold, the prophecy of the laughing one." A hushed tension gripped the villagers. Tunde leaned in. "What does he mean?" Malu stood, his frail body supported by a wooden staff carved with intricate symbols of the ancestors. "Long ago," he began, "the spirits spoke of a child who would laugh at sorrow, who would defy the customs of grief. They warned that this child would awaken a forgotten spirit, a force that has slumbered beneath our village for centuries." A nervous whisper rippled through the crowd. Some elders exchanged worried glances. Baba Ogunde narrowed his eyes at Adiro. "You are that child?" Adiro raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "And what if I am?" Malu's grip on his staff tightened. "Then you must be careful," he said gravely, "for your laughter may summon Insi, the spirit of sorrow and vengeance." At the name, several villagers gasped. The elders muttered incantations under their breath, drawing protective symbols in the air. The flames of the funeral pyre flickered, as if something unseen had stirred. Tunde's face paled. "Ensi, the cursed one?" Adiro exhaled. He had heard the name before, whispered in cautionary tales told to children around the fire. Ensi was no ordinary spirit. He was once a guardian of the dead, a keeper of balance, but he had been betrayed long ago. In his rage, he cursed the land, vowing that any who mocked death would face his wrath. The laughter drained from Adiro's lips. For the first time, something cold coiled in his chest. Baba Ogunde stepped forward, eyes dark as storm clouds. "You will go to the sacred shrine at dawn. The ancestors will decide your fate." Adiro nodded slowly. He felt the weight of 100 eyes upon him, the burden of a prophecy he had never asked for. And yet deep inside, beneath the fear and doubt, there was a spark of something else. Curiosity. If there was truly a spirit that despised laughter, then Adiro had to know why. As the funeral continued, the flames crackled and the village mourned. But in the shadows beyond the firelight, something watched, and for the first time in centuries, the night carried the sound of a chuckle. A dark, haunting laugh that did not belong to Adiro. The dawn came with an unsettling stillness. The usual morning sounds, the chirping of birds, the chatter of the villagers, the rhythmic pounding of grain, were absent. It was as if the village itself held its breath, waiting. Adiro woke to find Tunda sitting outside his hut, arms crossed, worry written across his face. "You should have run," Tunda muttered. Adiro stretched, yawning. "Run? Where would I go?" "Anywhere but the shrine." Tunda's voice dropped to a whisper. "No one who has been summoned there has returned unchanged." Adiro smirked, shaking his head. "Do you believe in old ghost stories now?" Tunda didn't answer. Instead, he stood, jerking his chin toward the village square. "They're waiting for you." Adiro sighed and followed. The elders had gathered beneath the baobab of remembrance, its sprawling branches shading the sacred meeting ground. Baba Ogunde stood at the front, his ceremonial robes dusted with white ash. Malu, the storyteller, with his frail but watchful eyes, sat beside him, gripping his wooden staff. Behind them, a group of masked figures, the keepers of the dead, stood in eerie silence. Their masks were carved from ebony wood, with hollowed-out eyes and markings of the underworld etched along the forehead. They were the village's connection to the spirits. Baba Ogunde raised his staff, signaling silence. "Adiro," he said, his deep voice echoing through the still air. "The spirits will decide your fate. You are to journey to the Shrine of Echoes and seek the will of the ancestors." The Shrine of Echoes. Adiro had heard the name whispered among the villagers, always in hushed tones, always with fear. The shrine was a place of judgment, where the dead whispered their secrets, where only the worthy returned with their sanity intact. A cold shiver crept down Adiro's spine, but he swallowed his fear and nodded. Baba Ogunde handed him a small carved totem, a figurine of a man covering his mouth. "Take this. If the spirits deem you unworthy, this will shatter, and your soul will be lost." The masked keepers stepped forward. Without a word, they turned and began the journey toward the shrine. Adiro followed, his heartbeat steady, but his mind clouded with questions. The path to the shrine wound through the forest of ancients, where trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled roots forming twisted patterns across the ground. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Adiro noticed something strange. There were no footprints on the path ahead. The keepers of the dead walked in silence, their feet leaving no mark upon the earth. Adiro's mouth felt dry. After what felt like hours, the trees parted, revealing a massive stone structure carved into the side of a mountain. The Shrine of Echoes. The entrance was marked by two towering statues, one laughing, the other weeping. Laughter and sorrow, forever intertwined. The keepers stopped at the entrance. One of them, a tall figure with a deep blue mask, turned to Adiro. "You must enter alone." Adiro hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. As he crossed the threshold, the air around him shifted. The sounds of the forest faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The chamber inside was vast, the walls lined with carvings depicting the history of life and death. The ceiling was high, disappearing into darkness. In the center stood a black stone altar, surrounded by flickering blue flames. Adiro took a cautious step forward. Then he heard them. They came from nowhere and everywhere, filling the air like a ghostly wind. Voices, some familiar, some strange, weaving in and out of his mind. Why does he laugh at death? He does not understand the price. The curse awakens. Adiro's breath came faster. He turned, searching for the source, but the chamber was empty. Then a shadow moved. From the darkness, a figure emerged. A woman, or at least something that had once been a woman. Her body was covered in tattered funeral robes, her eyes hollow, her skin stretched thin like dried parchment. She did not walk, she floated, her feet barely brushing the ground. Adiro's fingers tightened around the totem. "Who are you?" The figure tilted her head. "I am Obana, the keeper of secrets." Her voice was layered, as though 1,000 souls spoke at once. Adiro straightened his back. "You're a spirit." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And you are the one who laughs at funerals." Adiro swallowed. "I don't laugh to mock the dead." Obana drifted closer. "Then why do you laugh?" Adiro hesitated. He had never truly asked himself that question. Obana raised a skeletal hand, gesturing toward the carvings on the wall. They shifted and moved, revealing scenes of the past. Adiro saw a great village filled with laughter, people dancing, rejoicing in the cycle of life and death. But then something changed. A dark figure appeared, cloaked in sorrow. Shadows spread, laughter faded, and the village fell into ruin. Obana's voice was barely a whisper. Once, laughter and sorrow walked as equals, but one day sorrow was betrayed. His name was Ensi. Adaro's heart pounded. "You mean the vengeful spirit?" Obana nodded. "He was once a guardian like me. He watched over the dead, guiding them to peace. But the living mocked him. They laughed, not in joy, but in cruelty. They turned mourning into a jest. And so, he cursed them. He took away their joy and made them fear death." Adaro felt a strange unease crawl through him. "And what does that have to do with me?" Obana's hollow eyes locked onto his. "Because, Adiro, you are his descendant." A heavy silence filled the shrine. Adiro staggered back. "That's impossible." Obana's voice was cold as the grave. "You carry the blood of the man who betrayed him." Adaro's hands trembled. He had expected many things from this journey, but not this. Obana continued. "Ensi's curse has slept for centuries, but your laughter has stirred him. And now, he is waking." The shadows in the shrine deepened. A low, guttural sound echoed through the chamber. Not a whisper, not a growl, but a laugh. And it did not belong to Adiro. The flames flickered and the air grew colder. The spirit of Ensi had begun to awaken. Adiro staggered backward, his breath uneven. His descendant? The words echoed in his skull like the whispers in the shrine. How could he, an ordinary boy from Ukuta, be tied to an ancient, vengeful spirit? The low, unsettling laugh rumbled through the shrine again, deep and hollow, vibrating through the stone walls. "He stirs," Obana whispered. Her skeletal fingers traced the carvings on the shrine wall, which had begun to darken, as if ink was seeping through the stone. "Ensi knows your name now. He knows your laughter." Adiro clenched his fists. "I didn't mean to offend him." Obana's lifeless eyes bore into him. "It does not matter. The balance has been disturbed. Your fate is no longer your own." A cold wind swept through the chamber, snuffing out the blue flames. For a split second, the darkness was absolute, and in that moment, Adiro felt something watching him. A presence heavy, cold, ancient. Then the flames roared back to life, but something was different. The air felt heavier, and Adiro's carved totem had cracked. A thin fracture ran through the figurine's wooden surface. Obana exhaled. "The first sign?" Adiro gritted his teeth. "What does that mean?" Obana did not answer. Instead, she turned away, her spectral form dissolving into the air. The whispers faded. The shrine became silent once more. But Adiro knew something had changed. He didn't wait for more warnings. He turned and ran from the shrine. A village changed. By the time Adiro emerged from the forest, the sun was high in the sky, its light golden and warm. But Ukuta felt different. The usual bustle of the marketplace was subdued. The air, normally filled with the scent of fresh bread and roasting plantains, was thick and stagnant. Adiro passed the well and saw an elderly woman staring into the water, motionless. He paused. The old woman did not blink. She simply stood, gazing into the well as though she could see something lurking within its depths. A chill crawled up Adiro's spine. Further down the path, a group of children sat beneath the baobab of remembrance, their hands in the dirt, drawing symbols he did not recognize. They spoke in hushed voices, their expressions distant. Something was wrong. Adiro quickened his pace toward his home. He needed to find Tunda. That night, the village fell into an unnatural stillness. No one played music. No fires crackled. Even the animals were silent. Adiro lay awake in his hut, staring at the ceiling, gripping the fractured totem in his hand. His mind raced. Was Ensi truly returning? Suddenly, a faint chuckle. Adiro sat up, his heart pounding. The sound was not his own, it came from outside. Slowly he rose to his feet and peered through the gaps in his hut's wooden walls. A shadow moved near the village square. Adiro grabbed his walking stick and stepped outside. The air was thick, suffocating. He moved toward the square, his footsteps careful. Then he saw it. Near the baobab of remembrance, something stood in the dim moonlight. A man-shaped figure draped in a long tattered robe, its head tilted slightly. No face, no features, just emptiness. It stood completely still. Then, it laughed. A slow drawn-out chuckle, deep and hollow. Adiro's blood ran cold. His fingers clenched around the totem. The crack deepened. Then in an instant, the figure was gone. Adiro's breath came fast. His skin burned with fear. But in the silence that followed, he understood one thing. Ensi was already here, and he was watching.